The Liberal gun bill has passed in the Senate, and it has angered a lot of legal gun owners who say it really targets them and does nothing to address real gun crime here in Canada. Now, to talk about this in more detail is Lethbridge Conservative MP and Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage, Rachael Thomas, who joins us from Lethbridge. Rachael, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thanks, Hal. Great to be with you.
Now, while Bill C-21 was discussed as a means to tackle gun crime, there were a lot of concerns raised that most gun crimes were from guns that were smuggled in from the United States and not from legal gun owners like hunters and those on ranches.
Well, I think that's exactly it, Hal. You've really nailed the problem on the head. Look, we know that those who have a gun license were tested, they've been trained, and they hold that license having gone through due course. And then, of course, once they have that license, they can acquire a firearm. And of course, they're expected to use it responsibly. And if they should fail to do so, they'll be stripped of their license and their firearm. So in Canada, we actually have really strict laws already. And we know that the crimes that are being committed are not being committed by those who have gone through proper process, but rather by those who are smuggling guns into Canada. So, you know, the legislation that Prime Minister Trudeau has brought forward now, Bill C-21, will really do nothing to clean up the streets of our communities. You know, what needed to happen was we needed to reinforce our policing. We needed to go after gangs. We need to go after gun violence. We need to go after those who are smuggling firearms across the U.S. border into Canada. These are the types of things that are, you know, tangible actions that can be taken that would really make a meaningful difference. So, unfortunately, instead, Trudeau has decided that he's going to play politics. He would like Canadians to believe that he is doing something when, in fact, he's not, to keep our streets safe. And in reality, he's going after, you know, law-abiding hunters, law-abiding, you know, sport shooters, and of course, Indigenous folks who, you know, enjoy a traditional way of life as well.
Now, speaking of our Prime Minister, he was asked recently if he was really seriously considering finally axing the carbon tax. And the question was met by a resounding no. Rachael, why do you think that the message is not getting through to our Prime Minister that this tax is hurting so many industries and so many Canadians?
Well, if I tried to get into the head of Trudeau, I'm afraid that it would, you know, make my head spin. I'm really not able to make sense of what is in his head at times. And I think, you know, this is no exception. When it comes to the carbon tax, we know that it drives up the price of everything, from the time seed goes into the ground to the time that a harvest takes place to the time that food is processed and then onto grocery store shelves and then comes home. All of those steps along the way are, you know, have a carbon tax applied to them. And so then, of course, when people, Canadians, go to the grocery store to pick up a jug of milk or a box of cereal, they're having to incur the cost. And we know that Canadians are already struggling with affordability. We know that they're having a really hard time making ends meet. We know that they're cutting back on necessities. We know that they're skipping meals. And we know that, you know, a good portion of Canadians are close to insolvency or being in trouble. And so I think we're in a really destitute place as a Canadian public. And unfortunately, we have a Prime Minister who doesn't seem to lean in and care.
And we see a lot more Canadians, too, having to walk away from some of their mortgages as well with the high cost of inflation. It's just incredible. More and more tent cities going up all over the place. And not just those battling addictions, but those who've lost everything because of the high cost of living right now. Rachael, let's also talk about the expansion of the MAID bill, or medical assistance in dying, to include those with mental illness. Now, you say that assisted death here is not the answer, calling it, quote, reckless and irresponsible.
Yeah, I stand by those words. You know, medical assistance in dying came into place in 2016, and it's expanded slowly over time since then. Now the government is looking at making it possible for an individual with mental illness to ask for medical assistance in dying just based on the mental illness alone. And that'll come into place this spring. Now, there have been many voices that have vocally spoken out against this, including, you know, across the board, every single community that represents persons with disabilities has spoken out on this bill. or this expansion, I should say. In addition to that, every medical school in the country, the head of their psychiatric training has spoken out about this bill and said that it goes too far. And so, there's this push from the Liberal government to make medical assistance in dying more and more accessible. And there are others who are actual professionals who are speaking out and saying it's too far. So my colleague, Mr. Ed Fast from British Columbia, he created a private members bill that actually would scope out, in other words, protect those with mental illness and make it so that they could not request medical assistance in dying. Unfortunately, his bill was not successful in passing the House of Commons because the Bloc and the Liberals colluded in order to stop it. So I think that's a sad day for Canadians, because ultimately we want to make sure that we're a country that takes care of our most vulnerable. And of course, those who are struggling with a disability or with a mental illness are those that we should be looking after, not offering death.
And those concerns are also shared by Alex Schadenberg, the Executive Director of Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, who we've had on our program many times before, saying, there are better ways in solving and helping people across the country here, solving the issues.
Absolutely.
Now, Rachel, you and your leader, Pierre Poilievre, say the Trudeau government embezzled $150 million in their green slush fund. Now, the news broke recently thanks to a whistleblower. Millions of Canadians are struggling and going to food banks right now, over 2 million Canadians so far this year. You say the Liberals are more interested in serving its insiders rather than the people of Canada?
Well, certainly. Unfortunately, we're looking at a government that would rather reward its friends and make sure that they're looked after rather than serving Canadians. So, it's come to our attention, based on a brave whistleblower, that about $150 million was, taken and given to insiders rather than used for actual, projects. That's a problem. And so, we've had a lot come to light since this has been investigated at Ethics Committee in the House of Commons. This has been something that as Conservatives, we've been fighting for quite some time now, and just trying to draw attention to. And so I'm really proud of my colleagues at the Ethics Committee. In particular, Michael Barrett has been the lead on this. And I just think they've done a phenomenal job shedding light on the scandal, shedding light on the misuse of funds by this government and handing it out to friends. I should also mention this isn't the first time. The government also created the app for coming into Canada and spent $54 million on it. And it's come to light now that a whole bunch of that money was actually just, again, funneled to friends rather than used for the creation of the Arrive Can app. And they are currently under investigation by the RCMP. And so we'll wait and see what comes of that. But what we do know is that there are numerous examples of corruption within this government, and Conservatives are certainly kept busy trying to stay on top of it all. But it's worth it because we believe that Canadians deserve to know the truth.
The Liberals blocked a Tory motion calling for no bonuses for the CBC. Rachel, our public broadcaster, is laying off around 600 employees, and yet the head of the CBC, Catherine Tate, during a recent interview, wouldn't rule out bonuses for top executives. Bonuses paid for by our tax dollars.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Certainly, I've been trying to draw as much attention to this as possible. The CBC is funded to the tune of $1.4 billion from the Canadian taxpayers. That's a whole lot of money. And you want to make sure that that public broadcaster and the head of that public broadcaster, the CEO, Ms. Tate, are being held accountable to produce what Canadians want. And functioning in a manner that is actually stewarding those dollars. So when Ms. Tate came out, just weeks before Christmas and made the determination that she would let go 600 employees and not fill another 200 positions. So that means a total of 800 positions are gone. And this announcement is coming out just before Christmas. I mean, number one, the timing is cruel. And number two, you have a CEO who just received a $60,000 bonus in July. And meanwhile, she's, laying people off just a few weeks before Christmas. And then on top of that, she was asked, well, does that mean the top execs, those at the top, are not going to be receiving bonuses? And she just kind of shrugged her shoulders and said, well, not quite. So she's left that door open. And I think that's alarming because, to have someone at the head, to have someone at the helm willing to cut 800 jobs in a ruthless manner, but still willing to give out potentially tens of millions of dollars in bonuses, I think that's cruel and I think it's mismanagement.
Let's talk about the Speaker of the House for just a moment here. There's been pressure by your party to force the Speaker of the House, Greg Fergus, to resign. Rachel, why is that?
Well, Mr. Fergus is a relatively new speaker. He's been there for several months now, but no doubt he knows the rules because, of course, the first act of business when you're, made the Speaker of the House and it's an elected position, it's one of trust. The first act is to become familiar with the standing orders and to be able to reinforce those. And so one of those standing orders requires him to remain non-partial, or impartial, sorry, I should say, non-partisan. And yet he dressed in his robes as the Speaker of the House and then delivered a video greeting that was then shown at the Ontario Liberal Convention. And so, of course, this came to light. And as Conservatives, we've been pushing for his resignation because at the end of the day, he's proven that he isn't able to act in an impartial manner. He's proven that he does put partisanship ahead of his role as Speaker, and we find that problematic, not just for us as the Conservative Party of Canada and members of the House, but for all Canadians, because when the Speaker of the House acts in this way, it actually robs certain individuals of their voice.
Rachel, your party, the Conservative Party of Canada, is well ahead in the polls. In fact, if an election was held today, the Tories would win an easy majority government. Now, you tried to bring down the government with 30 hours of non-confidence votes to no avail. What will it take to end the Liberal NDP coalition?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the most sincere and best answer I can give is it's going to take the Canadian public to speak up and to, be bold in their vote. And so the next time we have, an election, my hope would be that Canadians are tired of the corruption of this current government, that they're tired of the misspending, that they're tired of watching, their cost of living skyrocket and go through the roof, that they're tired of crime escalating to a point where, our country seems unrecognizable in some places. And so, my hope, I guess, is that Canadians would see these things and not only see them, but that they would have the boldness or the courage to vote against the current government and to choose something new so that their future might look a whole lot better.
There's some insiders who say that Justin Trudeau may actually be forced to resign and take that long walk in the snow here to give his party a chance of being re-elected, something similar to what his father Pierre Elliott Trudeau did 40 years ago. But other people say, no, Trudeau's going to stay on as leader, and he's pretty happy to do so. What are you hearing right now on the Hill? Will Trudeau stay on as leader of the Federal Liberal Party of Canada?
Yeah, there's certainly a great deal of speculation around this. Of course, there are those who, believe that he's perhaps going to be shown the door by those, who are inside his party that might have some sway. There are others who think he himself might come to that decision. And then, of course, there's, another group of folks who believe he is absolutely going to stay in that position and try to win another election. So every thought is on the table, and the only way we'll know for sure, of course, is when the election is actually called, and we'll see who's in charge of the Liberal Party of Canada.
Yeah, time will tell, absolutely. Rachel, you recently hosted a Christmas open house. What were some of the concerns people in Lethbridge shared with you during this very busy holiday season?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It was certainly a wonderful event on December 9th. I hosted just over 600 people at a public open house for Christmas, and folks were able to come by and say hi to Santa, decorate some cookies, enjoy the fire, and of course listen to some live Christmas music. And so it was a really fun event, and of course people come with concerns as well. And the number one concern would be affordability. It would be around, being able to put the heat on in their home, being able to put groceries on in their fridge, being able to care for their families. That's definitely number one. And I would say the other one would just be a combination of, homelessness and addiction and mental health, which, the three of them, unfortunately often go together. And then, of course, with that, I think the other concern would just be, rising crime as well, and people wanting to feel safe in their communities. And I think having some concern around that.
No easy answers. Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage and Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachael Thomas, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. Great to be with you.